Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm Duck, and I'm here to teach you what they didn't teach you in K through 12. Today, I am going to go over this article that I found with you guys. It's by Jordi Alexander. He is a game theorist, and uh, he's very knowledgeable about DeFi. This is his article. It's part one of a multi-part series, so I'm really looking forward to uh, reading the other parts and going through them. But it's called Of Smoke and Mirrors. And before we get into this, I just want to say thank you for watching. And if you like this video, then go ahead and hit the thumbs up button for me. It'll really help me grow. Also, if you would like, you can subscribe and put the post notifications on to let you know when I let new videos out. I'm going to start pumping out more and more videos as we go along, and eventually we'll probably get on to doing some live streams as well. So let's get into this here then. Uh, he breaks this into different chapters, and I really like the layout of it. Uh, but he starts out with the answer to the ultimate question of life is the Ponzi verse and everything. Okay. Now, like I said, he's a game theorist, and so this right here is some game theory notation. It's the first thing I found really interesting, and it basically tells us that if one player in a Ponzi ends up winning, another one is losing even more. As you can see, it's a -4 plus 2, right? So if one winner won out, the other player will most likely be losing double, okay? And so that's kind of what we see with a lot of these DeFi protocols, especially like just scammy forks and whatnot, but also DEXs when they launch. Now, as we begin to get deeper and deeper into the Web 3.0 era, it seems like a lot of the mechanics only get more complex and bizarre. This is kind of like how I feel with Ohm and a lot of these DAOs that are coming up right now, right? I'm extremely familiar with math, okay? And the fact that I'm not necessarily able to follow some documentations or really make sense to it kind of scares me. And my complete thesis is to keep things extremely simple, follow a profitable path that I can take for an extended period of time, and uh, not get into things that I don't understand, because I feel like when I get into things that I don't understand, it's a recipe for disaster. As he says, complexity is a con man's favorite weapon, because the more time and expertise it takes for someone to truly understand the game, the longer they can be made to believe they are on the right side of it. So you don't want to be caught being somebody's exit liquidity. And that's what could happen if it's too bizarre and too complex that you don't know when the right time is to get out of it. Now, in his second chapter, he goes over these three fundamental laws of the Ponzi universe. And he starts out by stating that this is taking into consideration an isolated investment system, which is the money that has entered a protocol purely on the expectation of generating monetary profits. Now, all of the participants in this system have to be there for this reason. And he uses the example of people at a poker table where they all have to be at the poker table wanting to be pros and being economically incentivized, as compared to whether you were there for just fun. Maybe that would be an open system, whereas all pros economically incentivized is an isolated system. Now, in this isolated system, money can be moved around, but it cannot grow more than the money that was put in, right? So basically, you are confined to the pot. And so while there can be individual winners, it's only at the expense of participants who lose. If one person is taking a big chunk of the pot and there's a limited pot, but the same number of people there, then everybody else is going to get a comparatively smaller chunk. And for this reason, it not only seems like a zero-sum type of game, but that these Ponzi's are actually negative-sum games. Jordi says that the second law of thermodynamics, in the second law of thermoponzinomics, I'm sorry, the entropy loss in an isolated system only increases with time. So as costs increased over time and there becomes more participants in the game, players who win are only capable of winning less and less of the pool. He says in his third law that the amount of money in the system starts to decrease, the activity of the system spirals down to zero alongside it. So obviously, if there's not as much opportunity for a higher profit, people are going to leave. So you don't want to be the one stuck there, right? Although you have bags of these coins, you're going to be left a bag holder because it's just not profitable anymore, right? Without enough fresh revenues, as soon as the momentum rocket runs out of fuel, the death spiral commences. Losing hope of future riches, all of the buzz, the communities, and mindshare spiral down. He has a great graphic for this. I'm going to get to it in just a second. As Ponzi's get bigger and bigger, it takes exponentially more capital to keep the game going. So you can see how both of these ideas feed each other right here, right? If a Ponzi has super big attention, okay, and there's so many people contributing capital to it, putting more attention to it, that means that it takes more hot air to keep the balloon up. And when all that hot air runs out all at once, because there's so many people there, and the consequences of something wrong happening are so vast, then just as exponential as it was for the protocol to grow, it is exponential for it to spiral downwards. That's just like a forewarning, because that's what happens in these things, and you are taking a risk whenever you participate in these types of incentivized DeFi protocols. So he says in crypto, we've seen this dynamic play out countless times with DeFi protocol forks not adding anything particularly useful apart from a logo and a new chain. They enter the Ponzi cycle. Momentum builds as aggressive rewards in the form of liquidity mining attracts users to farm, increasing the total value locked. Yields start to decrease, people start to leave for higher yields, the price of the token drops as perceived adoption slows, which reduces yields even further and causes the rest to join the exit. So it's exodus, right? Plus shocks on liquidity, meaning if you're left to be the last bag holder, then you might not even be able to trade out of the token, which would be bad for your bags. So he goes through this framework and some frequently asked questions here. This section's a little bit quicker. He basically says that the way it works is people pool their money together, the mechanics of the protocol chop it up, and then the pool money is redistributed to winners and losers. Who's going to be the winner here? Legitimate projects will have a clear answer to this question. They will explain the execution risk involved, giving potential investors a transparent understanding to make a decision upon. He goes on to give some examples of what potential Ponzi's might be promising or what they might look like in their stories or narratives. And although these stories can make for great marketing sound bites, the virtual impossibility of such alpha being accessible to the public or the world deciding to denominate their lives in XYZ shitcoin currency should both set off your Ponzi detector to the max, right? So sirens should be going off when you hear some shady shit going on behind the scenes. Here he has another graphic showing us things like Uniswap, Yearn. They're not Ponzi's. They obviously have revenue. They're long-term bets. They've been here for a long time. Some things may seem like Ponzi's. They might be in between, but they also may be working their way towards a more profitable protocol where revenue is consistently generated for the business. He goes over some memes. He says there could be some benefit to being in memes that show strong community and people wanting to back them, as we've seen with Elon Musk. But then, you know, there's this question of, well, if the first law is true and there's no money being created for mechanics, some of these things say that they're able to return a 50,000% APY. How is this so? Now, what Jordi says is that it's important to understand that yield paid by a protocol in its own coin is extremely misleading. It's like you have Y tokens by the V value per token, and you have a rectangle where Y is the height, V is the width. As the height continues to increase to compensate for that disparity, the V value, the width of the rectangle, has to shrink as well. So at the same time as a 10% APR, for example, is coming out, the Y tokens are increased. This reduces the value per coin by the same rate. Okay, so the width shrinks. He's an example of smarter coin for this, but ultimately, what this comes down to say is those who can identify the sweet spot and sell first and lower the price to match the new value of V can extract from the other users. Okay? So this is kind of the dynamic that we want to see, especially if there's huge price swings. You're looking for that price eventually to come back down to the mean, and you want to be able to take advantage of the upside of that. So if that does happen, then you want to be able to take profits. He says that market caps are not great metrics for manipulated / tightly held tokens. If liquidity is low, it's easy to artificially keep the price high whilst pumping supply. So think about it. If liquidity is extremely low and they're incentivizing you to just hold the coin, and you're not going to be able to sell it, then they're going to be able to attract more and more and more people to this coin, pumping up the market cap, pumping up the price, right? But if anybody tries to sell, they're going to be crushed by slippage. Now, like I said earlier, Jordi is a game theorist, and this is a basic game theory graph. This is the board that tells us the different conditions that one player has compared to the other, and which condition one player might make based on the condition that the other player makes. And as we can see, in each case, for example, that player 2 makes, player 1's best option is to sell. Okay, so we can see here, if player 2 chose to stake, in each case, player 1's best option is to sell. If player 2 decides to bond, then player 1's best option is to sell because they get the highest payout over here. You see that? When player 2 decides to sell, player 1's best option is to sell because all of these are negative. And as you can see, this results in a sell-sell equilibrium. The only possible way for a 3-3 outcome to exist between two users that are not selling is with a greater fool being added as a third player, which can be real, but it shouldn't be celebrated because that means that we're dumping everything on one guy, okay? Now, Jordi goes into some possibilities for redemption. He explains gambling. I love gambling protocols and online gambling. I think it's a great market, and I only think that it has room to grow. As well as community and memes, NFT projects as well. Same story there. Charity and giving. We'll see how this grows in the Web3 space. Then he goes on to an investment scheme. And with an investment scheme, he says that one protocol can start in really just like a basic Ponzi scenario and potentially grow to encompass different aspects of DeFi or maybe incorporate with TradFi in some way, but in a way that creates revenue for the protocol and it allows its users to continue to want to stay over the long term. And the last one is grouping attention and selling it, which I also think is extremely profitable over the long term and here to stay. he says that new protocols are giving liquidity mining incentives to their first users in order to bootstrap activity. And in this case, the incentives could go to the protocol directly, which means if they gain that attention and there's other things bubbling up in that protocol, then it would be extremely beneficial for this DEX, for example, or whatever Ponzi it is that's facilitating this. And great examples of this right now are Algorand. Algorand is having a lot of development right now on its ecosystem. Its DeFi ecosystems are blowing up, and there's more and more DEXs coming online, so there's going to be more liquidity in the protocol, as well as Near. Near just dropped Aurora, okay? Well, Aurora is on one of Near's shards, and Aurora is expanding rapidly in the DeFi space. And it's super easy to use, super fun to use, and I'm seeing a lot of revenue for myself coming from that. So, just to recap this video, guys, ultimately, what it comes down to is you have to be the first to sell. You want to identify rotations in the market when yields start to come down and people begin to exit and the hype draws down. But you don't want to be last in the party to witness this. You want to get a whiff of it and say, okay, let me start scaling out. Let me find the next best opportunity. Or let me just rotate back into something safer until the next best opportunity actually does present itself. Don't get hooked on flashy narratives. They're probably not true. And you want to be looking for legitimate long-term projects that you're going to be able to play with for an extended period of time. Just remember, as Ponzi's get bigger and bigger, it's going to be harder to navigate in and out of them. And at the end of the day, keep things simple. Don't overcomplicate things. Keep it simple, and don't get into things that you have no clue how to understand. If you need help understanding it, reach out to somebody who you think might understand it so that they can help you understand it. But never get into something that you don't even know what's going on behind the scenes, and you're just going to be the one who's left as the greater fool, because that's never a way to win in life. You want to be ahead of the curve, and you want to understand the dynamics of these different ecosystems that you're playing around with. So with that said, guys, thanks for watching my second video. If you liked it, like I said, hit the thumbs up button for me. That'll really help in boosting me, as well as subscribe if you want to see more videos like this down the road.